Indic jurisprudence on human rights, a historical context, existing commitments of India to the international human rights norms and treaties, and current scenario. We thank all the participants for attending this course up till the very last session. With further ado, I would like to C.R. Venkataramani. C.R. Venkataramani was Parliament of India and Supreme Court and affects extensively in indirect tax authority as member Law Commission of India 2010.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
I couldn't hear.
Sir, you may start the session, sir.
Pardon?
You may start the session, sir.
Just give me half a second.
Yeah.
Can we start? Am I both audible and visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You may start.
Very well. Now let me greet all the young thinking minds assembled here, really though to a virtual process. And the idea of gathering through under a forum like HRDI was a very interesting proposition. Even though a real world interaction would have made an intense difference. But even so, as many exchange of views takes place in as many possible methods, forums, tools, I think they are welcome. Now, why do we at all, as human beings, trouble our minds with the idea of rights? Why do we keep constantly talking about, thinking about, deliberating about rights of people? Now, if you're only going to talk about the role of India over a period, over a millennia, as to how it, through its philosophy, through its diverse philosophical traditions and religious ideas, and also managing diversity of language and culture, how India had contributed to a world understanding of what one may call how do we really create an orderly society and manage it again through an orderly process. On the one hand, before I proceed to talk about what India had done with the concept of understanding of rights, justice, administration of justice, and much later about the idea of human rights, I think it's important for us to also understand that the constant yearning of societies at any point of time in history to always think about peace and fulfillment of every individual in the pursuit of, let us say, happiness, material happiness and contentment and solace in life beyond material happiness. I think every social order, every civilization, whatever merit you may grant in terms of the Western understanding of degrees of superiority and civilization, etc., every social order always tried to find out how an ideal social order built on peace, commitment, community can ever be realized. So that's, I think, the grand idea which has been constantly, persuading human minds to engage on enriching understandings of ideas of law and justice. Now, the reason why, if at all, we need to talk about the Indic commitment or the Indic contribution has arisen because, as all of us know, that the colonial expansion, which began as a physical conquering of spaces, countries, and peoples, inevitably led to the conquering of peoples not only in the public space, but conquering people in their entire civilizational framework. So colonialism also meant conquering people's minds. And if I am a civilization higher in quality and degree, I, as an expanding colonial empire, can tell the rest of the world that you are inferior to me. We don't look at your civilization as civilization worthy of any acceptance. We don't look at a religion as a religion of any equal relevance to what the Western religions are. So when you look at colonialism emanating from Europe particularly, you would not have seen colonialism emanating from any other part of the world. Europe was a place which gave birth to colonialism. And Europe gave birth to colonialism. Contemporaneous to colonialism, you'll also find there are a few other unspoken, dimensions. And what are they? Europe has seen a bloody war of more than 1,000 years between Islam and Christianity. The struggle or the between Islam and Christianity was not really again a question of which is the superior religion or which is the only religion to be followed by the rest of the world. So when you want to persuade somebody else to say that, look here, my religion is superior to you, you can do it in so many ways. And the best way to go about doing it is to occupy an area, a country, a place which belongs to the other person. So the physical, geographical occupation and the wars between Christianity and Islam in Europe, in my understanding, has led ultimately, after a long years of thousands of years of bloody war between these two religions, to the understanding that we need a rule of law. The conflict between Islam and Christianity has been one major reason why the so-called liberal ideas in Europe, the liberal political ideas in Europe, namely liberty, fraternity, equality, then rule of law, and so on and so forth, were all products of this long centuries of war between these two religions. When they were warring in Europe, and when they thought that the war in Europe is not ending, they better conquer the rest of the world, you will find geographical, social, cultural, and religious expansions taking place. Colonialism really achieved this kind of an expansion at a global level. That's why, if you look at what happened in about 200 years of British history of Indian subcontinent, I just want to read. This was a bulletin written by William Bentinck, and this bulletin talks about what the British people can do or the colonial empire can do to India. So how do you go about assessing the Indian mind and the Indian people? Let me quickly read it and tell you what exactly it means, and then come to the Indic contribution. I quote from what somebody called Percival Spear wrote somewhere in 1820s. He says, "We now turn to the class of Western innovations which were superimposed, as it were, upon the existing body of customs and laws in India. The principle of equality of the subject before the law is one which lies at the root of the whole body of English law. It was equally absent from the body of Hindu custom, with its special privileges for Brahmins and disabilities for the exterior caste or depressed classes. The principle was laid down but the Charter Act of 1833 in the matter of qualifications for government office, thus condemning by anticipation the color of bar of which so much was heard later. It has been explained that this had little immediate effect in practice, but went further. He modified the Hindu law of inheritance to make it possible for a convert from Hinduism to inherit the family property. It was the first invasion of the principle of equality into the domain of Hindu personal law. A further influence in this direction was the whole system of Indian public law. The inspiration for all changes was British, and the machinery of courts and legal procedure came from the same source. There is a good deal of literature which proceeds thereafter from the source of what is what's called the public law proposition by the British for Indian subcontinent. Now, that being set in motion in the 1800s, you will find that slowly over a period of time, the colonial mind virtually invaded every domain and niche of the Indian religion, culture, civilization, and way of life. I'm not here on a critique of what happened, the critique between West and East. I don't think that that's going to be a very enterprising engagement. What I want to point out is that by reason of 200 to 300 years, or what is called the Oriental approach, Edward Said was one of the initiators of the concept of Orientalism. So the Orientalism caught the imagination of many Western political liberal thinkers. There are two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, we had people who had sympathies with the Oriental cause. On the other hand, who wanted to use the Oriental cause to infuse to the Western ideas of political liberalism in the rest of the world through colonial expansion. So, if on the one hand, if you have to counter all that, you find that we have a series of obstacles. There is probably because the way the history of Indian religion or Indian culture or Indian people were written in the past 200 years, the question as to whether Indian people or Indian spiritual understanding or religion was in principle opposed to what contemporary rights are talking about, namely equality, dignity, fairness, and so on and so forth. So a whole body of literature has evolved over a period of time which presents Indian spiritual understanding, philosophical traditions, and religion in a poor line life to say that all these were opposed to equality. So when Dr. Ambedkar, with one of his, a scintillating mind in our country, he built a theory that if Hinduism is built on a hierarchy, graded hierarchy, and because of the graded hierarchy, as long as the graded hierarchy is part of a system, no constitutional rights can flourish. Therefore, people have caught on and built up and are built on this interesting proposition by Dr. Ambedkar. I am not here going to enter into a conversation with that or say whether it's the right, good or bad. But then there is a theory. And therefore, by the time you had the Indian Constitution coming into the scene, a whole body of understanding which has virtually discounted anything Indian as a contribution to human rights. Because it's not enough for us to say that our understanding of Dharma, the whole idea of Dharma is very difficult to explain, and then the understanding of Dharma virtually covered the whole fabric of Indian life in several ways, and therefore is far superior to any other understanding, is not going to be sufficient. The large number of well-meaning people, even since Vivekananda has been talking about the Indian contribution understanding through the postulate of Dharma. And you will find even contemporary writers engage in what one may call the resurrection of Indian thought and its what's called the suggested hostility between Indian thought and to the rights of human beings. The suggested hostility. If you're able to break it, if you're able to say that this hostility, this difference, this conflict is fictional, and at the same time, it's because of a certain orientation, then probably we would be able to say something very foundationally strong for a future generation of people to say that we are no longer slaves of a certain kind of an understanding. That's a very important, dimension which you must know before you even talk about human rights in general. Now, why I want to talk about all this, I am trying to pick up, throw before you several loose threads. You will have to pick them up, tie them, integrate them, weave them into a nice framework of understanding for Indian history's relation to rights, Indian history's relation to promotion of an ideal social order, Indian history's contribution to all this, etc., and how that endeavor did not really happen, and when these endeavors got frustrated owing to certain other reasons. Therefore, unless we have that complete understanding, the question of talking about Indian contribution to human rights would be an half or a inadequate story. But let me stop here for a minute and to say that if at all one can talk about, I'm not wanting to talk about Hinduism and human rights, because that narrows down the scope of our understanding. If you look at the Indian spiritual traditions and philosophical traditions, they did not go by anything called a Hinduism. They were looking, if you look at any one of the Upanishads or the Vedantas, and much later, for instance, between the 12th to 18th century, before the colonial empire really imposed its onslaught, you would find a large number of thinkers and writers in the subcontinent who were not even fairly well known because their names were suppressed, their writings were not flourished, they were not even, they did not become the mainstream course of study by people, so on and so forth. So you find, if you look at all these, interesting corpus of Indian thought, you'll find they were trying to focus on how do we conceive of a life as a well-ordered, self-contented, and a fulfilling life. So suppose I have one kind of a conception, and which promotes rights as a basis, and then we necessarily land into the contemporary dimensions of human rights. I just give you an example how even today, after 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came in 1948. And before that, you had in Europe, both the World War I and World War II. People normally say, students of human rights and historians say, that it is two world wars which led to the realization that we need a corpus of understanding of rights, which can be designated as human rights, and of universal application. So by the time World War II was fought, remember that colonialism has virtually exploded into the entire length and breadth of the globe. Probably there is no part of the globe which was not under colonial empire. But by 1948, you have other things which have happened in the world history. One is that the emergence of socialism and its challenge to Western capitalist model of social order and development. So the conflict between socialist challenges and capitalism also led to certain proclaimed need for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So if you look at all that and see within 1948, and by you come to another 28 years later, 18 years later, you find two important milestones in the history of human rights. One is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the other is the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Both of them came in 1966. But for one decade, they did not really become part of the corpus of United Nations law. So in 1976, the covenants became, let's say, a good part of the international law. Probably 150 or 180 countries have ratified both of them. But the reason why, after these two independent sets of covenants were brought into effect as part of international law, the reason why they were distinct, principles, and the reason why even today these there is a dichotomy between civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights. The dichotomy, notwithstanding some universal statements that there is all human rights are indivisible because they are all ultimately talking about dignity, liberty, fundamental freedoms, which all coalesce into one grand social order. But in the process, what has happened is the ability of any other civilization or any other country to be able to throw an alternate framework of understanding about rights. That has not really happened. Because when we study as students of law, we study jurisprudence, we're all, whether it's Saman, pick up any book, textbook on jurisprudence, the basic thing is rights and then how do you talk about rights? How do you define rights? What are rights? Public rights, private rights. So the whole concept of rights has occupied the universe of the discourse of jurisprudence. And on the contrary, if you look at what India had done over a period of time, they did not isolate rights from the other ways of life. The Indian way of life looked at both rights and duties as a complementary process of living. There's nothing like rights without duties and duties without rights. But because the presentation that Indian civilization was opposed to equality, and it contributed to graded inequality, hierarchies in society, the four varnas, and the innumerable jatis or castes which have grown over a period of time. All these are attributed to the sources of Indian philosophy and tradition. Therefore, if they are based on the Indian philosophical tradition and understanding, then what good use of these philosophical traditions, because they are in direct conflict with contemporary understanding of the rights of people. And what do you mean by rights of people? You and me are equal. You and me must have the same element of degree of liberty. You and I are in the same position to practice all those freedoms. And then any state intervention or any private claim that you and I are not equal is a thing not to be countenanced. Therefore, the whole discourse of rights is built on the need and or the duty of the state to promote rights of people. Let me ask one question. When you talk of rights, when we talk of rights at all, like if there is a conflict between two human beings, if there is a hostility between two human beings, if there is a difference between two human beings, and one human being says, this is mine and this is not yours. So the assertion about a matter, a thing, a place, or a person, or an idea, so an assertion of an exclusive possession of a certain thing, or a matter, or a property, etc., leads to the concept of rights, because there is a conflict. So human civilization, if you look at the Israeli historian, Noah Harari, he talks about how agriculture, in fact, led to a series of conflicts in among human civilizations. We thought the hunter society was bad, and then was less civilized, and an agricultural sedate society was a greater improvement in terms of civilization, because people got settled and you know what to do about your food, your needs, and so on and so forth. But then agriculture was intrinsically related to property. And property means ownership and possession. And ownership and possession means conflict. So therefore, in every aspect of a social order, where the ideas of possession, ownership, and sovereignty, superiority come in, necessarily there will be need for rights. So the concept of rights has become intrinsically founded on a divided social order. A social order which is built on conflicts, which is built on conflicting claims. That's why you find the contemporary thinking on human rights are built on how we continuously talking about resolving the conflict among rights. So one right will give rise to another right, a second right, a third right, a fourth right, so on and so forth. So if you look at women's rights, you will find an innumerable dimensions of right relating to women. So child right. So any particular right of any particular component or a constituent of a community will necessarily lead to multifarious aspects and dimensions of set of rights. So you will find a proliferation of rights. So one set of rights multiplying itself. So that is what as contemporary human rights has led to. Now, just to complete the connection between what has started in the beginning about Indic contribution and the contemporary commitments. Now, if you're looking at the Indian philosophical tradition and say, look here, there is no dichotomy between rights and duties, and therefore we need to bring about a jurisprudence where the amalgam of rights and duties should be an alternative paradigm than what is available under international law of human rights, then it's a huge exercise. Lot of social, political, and other economic, thought process will have to go into it. But it's worthwhile, engaging oneself on that. But I'll leave it at that. But now, since essentially to look at a few other developments in world history, and that would be, can you imagine today that except the People's Republic of China or Korea, the rest of the world, most part of the rest of the world live under free liberal constitutions. The free liberal constitutions are based again on rights of people. And the rights of people to be guaranteed by a state which is expected to be neutral, in the sense the state is neither in favor of the rich nor merely an agent of the poor. The state is neither an agent of a particular religion. The state is not an agent of a particular political ideology. The state is not a propagandist of, let's say, a particular economic theory. The state will have to only promote and protect the rights guaranteed under the Constitution. Now let's ask a question. Is there any textbook available before any government or for us which can answer us, which can guide us as to how we really protect and promote these fundamental rights? Obviously, the answer is no. Therefore, any state and any government today will have to keep exploring a variety of alternatives, engaging in a variety of experiments in trying to promote and protect rights of people. While doing so, what happens? Unfortunately, or whatever one may call it, if we had lived in splendid isolation without a colonial expansion, just imagine what could have happened. And we are no longer in the splendid isolation. We live in a globalized world where we are not only physically connected so quickly, we are connected intellectually, we are connected through ideas, we are connected through trade, commerce, we are connected through all other kinds of human ties and bondages. So if this connection can also turn into impositions. Therefore, the challenge before us as students of human rights is to understand all these very interesting dimensions. At the same time, if we are also not in comfort with either a particular religion or a particular political ideology saying we are superior. Just to digress here for a minute, I was trying to tell you that European struggle for more than 1,000 years between two religions has been probably the reason why rule of law has been talked about in Europe in such big way. And then the separation of church from state. Look at the controversy still, in US or in Europe about church and state separation. In our own country, we have recent cases where governmental intervention in religion has become problematic. And while all this is happening, the greater clamor for promotion of individual rights, and that keeps happening. So that's why, before I proceed further, I was talking about the two international covenants of 1966. Now, why do we talk about an international covenant on civil and political rights as distinct from a covenant on economic, cultural, and social rights? When you look up the contents of these two covenants, you will find that they are probably to some extent a reiteration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. But still, these two covenants try to segregate civil and political liberties and economic and social and cultural rights as if they are two distinct components. As we discussed earlier, the Cold War and the challenges of socialism to pure market and capitalism in the rest of the world was one reason why the debate, namely, that whether you have liberty and freedom or not, it is immaterial as long as you are properly taken care of about your needs. Therefore, a socialist challenge said the needs of the people met by a socialist ideology, you don't need a freedom of speech and expression. You don't need the liberties which are so expansively spoken about in the capitalist world. All that you need is the competence of the state to have a social order where the needs of the people are taken care of. So this essential socialist challenge went into, in a manner of speaking, looking at civil and political liberties on the one hand and economic, social and cultural rights on the other hand. But much later, we are today, whether in the Indian Constitution or even in the US Constitution, nobody probably will say that we will give up our political liberty if the state guarantees us a reasonable livelihood. We will give up our right to practice religion if the state guarantees our food. I don't think people will talk about it because beyond the existential physical needs of human being, namely the food, the sustenance of the body and so on and so forth, we live by our minds. Our minds generate ideas, thoughts, and a creativity. Our minds are what biologists call the explanation machines. The minds explain everything around us. And by explaining, we keep reordering, ordering, rearranging the society and the world around us. So human beings will not rest content only with sleep and food. So we live beyond sleep and food. And what is that? It is art, it is culture, it is religion, it is civilization, and the constant urge to keep on knowing more and more about this universe, to keep on exploring more and more about our minds, and thereby refining our relationships, and thereby refining the quality of our life. Therefore, today we are at a crossroads of trying to understand how the corpus of human rights, which I say is a product of a certain historical or geographical context in the globe, and at the same time, contemporary constitutional developments cannot be given up. Probably we will not vote in favor of a constitution being withdrawn or a constitution being abrogated, because then the answer would be probably chaos and a social order in which there is no room for a civilized way of living. So constitutions, constitutional ideas, constitutional rule, and connected with that is democracy and principles of accountability. Now tell me, in the midst of all this, how do we really talk about an Indic commitment to human rights? So that needs a deep exploration, as I said to come back, a deep exploration of Indian thought, of Indian religion, of Indian philosophical traditions, in their ability to provide solutions and resolutions of problems which, notwithstanding the best efforts of governments all over the world, right? Notwithstanding the best efforts of governments all over the world to find happiness, solace, and fulfillment for all its people. Because ultimately, we are still a divided society. Our society is divided by reason of caste, by reason of economic differences, by reason of social antagonisms, and so on and so forth. So how do you really bring in a framework wherein these distinctions among human beings, we need not dissolve them. We need not eradicate them. But how do we really find out we can live with them? That's a huge challenge. So is there a scope within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the contemporary post-World War human rights statements? Is there sufficient room in all of them to be able to provide solutions for contemporary challenges among human beings? My own understanding is the answer is doubtful. Because we increasingly are talking about generating more and more hostilities among human beings. We are talking about generating more and more differences among human beings. We are saying on the one hand, the right to religion is important. Then we say, how do we really say which religion is superior? So then we denounce other religion. I say my religion is superior. If you say my language is superior, then we denounce the other languages. So generating protection and promotion of rights necessarily involve the need to travel a certain distance where the conflicts on a proper understanding can be without the conflicts, without these foundations being dissolved, the conflicts can be resolved. Is that a possibility? It's a very big challenge. Suppose we have had all these recent, claims in our Indian society for reservation by certain sections of the Indian community. They say we are socially, economically backward, whether it is a particular community in Haryana or in Rajasthan, or for instance, the Lingayats community in Karnataka wanting to have a separate religious identity. What is that they are asking for? They are asking for certain things on the basis of a comparison with somebody else. So the comparison with somebody else comes because this somebody else enjoys certain constitutional protections and privileges. And that constitutional protection privileges have probably given a different kind of a status to those set of people. Therefore, why can't I have them? So the question is, if there is a small piece, a small cake, how do all of us have an equitable piece of the same pie? A very difficult question to answer. So these are issues where the conflicting claims among human beings in relation to a variety of things in life, conflicting claims, are the foundations of the reasons why we are talking about human rights. And if there is any textbook solution for the resolution of the conflicting claims, well, we would have been very happy, but we don't have. But we have some civilizational principles in India, and those civilizational principles are with which we have lived over centuries. So Indian subcontinent had seen different languages living without one language killing and destroying the other, or one denomination without virtually disseminating the other. Even though there have been instances of the Indian subcontinent, let us not gloss over them, let us not forget them. Even among various denominations of the Hindu religion, there have been conflicts. There are stories and versions that post Adi Shankara's period, Buddhism took a back seat, and then both Vaishnavism and Hindu Saivism were able to override even Jainism to a large extent. If you look at some of the historical tracts being written in contemporary times in southern parts of India, where they say a particular variant of Jainism and Buddhism was prevalent, and in fact it was being practiced mostly in southern India, but owing to the Brahminical dominance and the Aryan invasion, so on and so forth, these religions lost their foothold in the southern part of India. So many historical presentations are being attempted. In the midst of this, all that therefore, we need to find out to have a proper called a roadmap ahead, where we clearly understand the concept of rights, we clearly understand the concept of human rights across the globe. We also understand the reasons and why these human rights are the product of what historical factors. And then if we need to necessarily build further on two important principles, let us not forget it. What are those two important principles? That we will have to live in open society. And what do you live in open society? An open society is one where no individual human being or a group of people will have dominance over somebody else. And no thought, no idea will claim superiority over some other thought or idea. Therefore, there is room for every thought, there is room for every idea, there is room for every people, and that's an open society. And what's a closed society? A closed society where a set of people, whether it can be a communist party, whether it can be a Nazi socialist party, it can be a group of people. So one set of people saying that our our ability to govern this country and our people need not give way to the ability or the competence of the people themselves to rule themselves. Therefore, an open society is a more important idea which we cannot give up at all. The second is an open society is probably well protected by rules of constitutions. Therefore, an open society and the constitutional rule are two twin pillars and foundations which probably we cannot give up at all. But then there are, as we're talking about some of the conflicts, there is some current disturbances which are happening because I would not like to go into great detail on these matters. So there has been a certain amount of resentment on wrong historical presentations of Indian history. And because of that, you'll find that whether Hindu religion or some part of Hindu tradition and thought have been put in poor limelight again. There are lots of distortion. So there is disagreement, there is dissentment, there is a lot of opposition to it, and rightly so. While doing so, there is a certain amount of what's called crossing the limits of tolerable ways of expression and civilized way of dealing with human beings. So this is yet another aspect we need to take care of. So while on the one hand, freedom of speech and expression, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, are very important. And therefore, there is no one religion is superior in our country. And but at the same time, if we are not able to practice a certain amount of restraint in what we are doing, we are not able to practice restraint in a constitutional sense, then we will have so many other problems. Therefore, my own understanding is the best way an Indic commitment to human rights can come in is through more refined articulation and restatement of the current idea of human rights and constitutional idea. More refined and re-articulation of rights from an Indic perspective. If that is so, then we would have probably enabled and also created a platform and an arena and an environment conducive to an orderly resolution of a wide range of what called challenging problems in our community. So that's how I would like to put it. I think I may now enter into a question and answer session. Will that be okay, Sashank?
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us. We will now be opening to questions. Kindly type your questions in the chat. Please remember to ask relevant questions, participants. So, we had a question from Tamanna Gupta. Differences need to be resolved, not eradicated. One needs to live with them. Sir, in case of religious and racial violence, doesn't this approach fall flat?
No, first question is, what do you mean by racial violence? So if some people think that race is a factor as a part of our life and therefore I will treat A, B, C as a lesser race, then certainly the very thought process is wrong. See, if the thought process is wrong, then the ways and means of expressing your thought process, then do you have any control on the ways and means of expression? History has never shown us any ways and means of orderly expressions. While pacifists like Mahatma Gandhi and non-violent way of expressing oneself still holds good for a good part of the community, but there will be fringe elements in the society who, for a variety of reasons, either don't abide by, let's say, ahimsa, non-violence, or who don't probably think that's the best way of going about it. So if for a long period there is a resentment, and as what's happening in USA today, so if the state has turned its blind eye, a particular way of approaching to a particular problem, then you will find people say, I've heard people saying, and not only today, for over a long period of time, only when the fire burns, you get noticed. As long as there is no fire, then you don't even notice what is happening in the smoke. So therefore, the extreme ways of expressing oneself against what's called inappropriate human understanding and wrong human understanding, inconceivable human understanding, and impermissible human ways of dealing with other human beings, as long as that happens, well, this will also happen. But that does not mean that the alternate means of exploring resolutions should be given up. I think history goes on like that. On the one hand, you will always peace, non-violence, ahimsa, and order and all that. On the other hand, there'll always be people for a good set of reasons who will probably cross some lines and say, look here, this is how I would like to express my resentment. And law may have to deal with them, maybe sometimes compassionately, maybe sometimes from in a very strict angle. There can't be any called ex ante answer to all these questions. But what I mean to say is that because we have we have taken certain things for granted so far, difference among human beings on the basis of race and caste. Now let me ask myself a question. Now the difference among human beings on the basis of race and caste, if there are conflicting theories, and I say I hold a particular theory, and you hold a different theory, the first problem is the problem is between theories. Then the problem is between theories and reality is received to the background. Therefore, we as theoreticians, now let's say I propagate my theory, you propagate your theory. Therefore, the conflict is the roots of the conflict lie there. So how do you really resolve that? You will find that as you go deeper into it, there are large other unseen, invisible ramifications and dimensions. I would not like to probably go into it and get a detail, but today, let us not forget that today, can we say that any part of the world, any country in the world, any religion in the world, any political ideology in the world is practicing pacifism, is practicing equality, is practicing non-violence? The answer would be no. So how do we therefore find at the international level a large number of what's called interfaith, variety of such, associations and engagements going on. But the effect of all that is peripheral. On the one hand, we have people meaningfully engaged in all these exercises. On the other hand, you will find either arms race or political ideological races or issues where huge amount of money or investment will take place in propagating a particular religion or propagating a particular ideology. So therefore it happens. The only way to combat them is more and more of truthfulness, more and more of engaging with the reality as it can be and as it is. And that's the only answer.
So, what is your view on the cultural revolution in China and their imposing their Mao-oriented ideas within the same sect of society? Is this also a form of violation of human rights, considering it's within the same country and just an ideological imposition?
See, how much do you know about what's happening in China? Your question is premised on a certain understanding of something happening in China, no?
Yes, sir. Tamanna
Yes,
has asked this question.
yes, correct. So, what is the understanding about the tower in depth, sir? Okay, all right. Now, let us say there are a certain Muslim community in the northern part of China, right? Whose religious rights are virtually being taken away, destroyed. They are subject to what is called learning the lessons of the state. So when socialism, the early origins of Bolshevik rule in Soviet Russia, and even today in People's Republic of China, if you don't abide by what is called the line of the state thinks in a particular way. Which way it thinks? It thinks in the way the Communist Party of China thinks. And if the Communist Party of China thinks that right to religion is unnecessary, then so be it. So therefore, within that country, if somebody thinks, all right, I don't have a problem with losing my right to religion, but I'm otherwise happy. If therefore a rationalistic view of society where an agnostic
Guys, there seems to be an internet problem, so kindly hold on.
We are just trying to fix the network fix, sir. As soon as we get more updates, we'll let you know.
Aniket, please check whether sir is in the waiting list or not.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Sir,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
maybe
What?
proceed forward.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So just hold on, sir.
No issues.
Sir, most welcome you again in the session for the technical glitches that we are facing today. Prakriti, please.
Prakriti, I think you won't be having the questions, right?
Yes, sir, because
You left.
I logged
Yeah,
out,
yeah,
so the questions have been cleared.
yeah. I'm just asking them. Okay.
All right, sir.
Yeah. Discrimination on the basis of
Pardon?
and get human rights according
Aniket,
to the
your
law. Hello.
voice is. Hello, sir. You're audible, sir. You're audible, sir.
Vedant,
Hello.
stand up.
Am I audible,
You're
sir?
audible, sir. You're audible, sir.
Okay, I'm just asking the question. As you said that there should be no discrimination on the basis of caste, religion, economic conditions, etc., and everyone should get the human rights according to the law. But in a society, it's actually not followed by anyone. there is discrimination. The main problem is on the basis of religion and economic condition. So, sir, what efforts can our generation take to reduce all such discrimination going on in the society? Sir, what's your idea and value points on this subject?
My first statement will be all social conflicts can be intelligently handled only if we proceed with the utmost sincerity and conviction that we want to resolve them. The moment we step into an arena on the ring to fight and to combat, then we are not really talking about elimination of all these social issues. Therefore, first is the willingness and the commitment to be sincere, to be open, and to be prepared for a variety of approaches to solving a problem. So there is no problem which can be solved only by one method or one way. There can be more than one method, but all methods, let us say, must be of equal validity, equal importance, and but based on one common denominator, namely peace, ahimsa, and understanding. That's the only one what called intelligent way of going about it. The second is the discriminations we are talking about are a product of history. Or a product of history means what? Not a particular religion alone has created discriminations. So there is a certain myth about whether Indian religion created inequality. Maybe not, maybe. But then, whether or not it created inequality, the question is how do we now go about solving any inequality? What kind of inequality we want to solve? What kind of discrimination we want to handle? So therefore, they need, on the one hand, a commitment and sincerity. On the other hand, whatever be the reasons for current, discriminations and conflicts among human beings, current lack of rights, etc., whatever be the reasons, the question is, how do we really resolve them? So which are the most sensible ways of resolving them? We must find solutions. Now look at what's happened in the context of COVID. Now the government is struggling to find solutions. The governments are not prepared to handle a situation like this. So people are finding fault with variety of governments all over the world. So it is as if, suppose somebody had a telepathy that look at something is like this going to happen. Would they be in a better position to find out better solutions? Perhaps not. Question is, how do we really say that if all of us, all human beings are entitled to fundamental dimensions of dignity, fairness, and fairness of treatment both in substance and process? If you're committed to that, then I think the solutions will definitely come. But today, since I am dragged behind by my own religion, I think my caste is superior. And look at what happened a couple of days ago. A person belonging to a so-called inferior caste being shot dead because they want to go and pray in a temple. So the question is, these are things which are happening in the fringes of society, but they reflect on the kind of intolerances we have for the innate dignity and equality of all human beings. Therefore, we must give up certain what called contentious dimensions of race and castes and religions. There are certain innate aspects of religion which we cannot give up, or there can't be any compromise. But there are contentious dimensions. So therefore, we have to study them carefully and avoid those contentious dimensions, and where conflicts very often happen. And how do we, therefore the second lesson is how best we equip ourselves to avoid conflicts which are unnecessary. I can't say that the conflict between religion A and religion B can be resolved because they're two different religions and they are what they are. But if in the practice of religion, if somebody says this is what I will do, then it can be avoided. So what can be avoided should be understood. What can be avoided should be very intelligently handled. But we're not doing it today. We get emotionally involved. We get, sometimes we are partisan, and sometimes very often we are biased. The reasons are obvious. I think if I find, if A faith or B faith or religion A or some other ideology says, oh, this is absolute nonsense about a particular religion, then you certainly get upset about it. I'll give a small example. During this period, a leading lawyer in our country spoke about Ramayana and Mahabharata being the opium of the masses, and why should governments being engaged in saying, directing the telecast of these serials. And then we had another journalist who picked up the issue of a killing of two priests in Maharashtra. So both of them are practicing freedom of speech and expression. But so both of them were trying to point out something which according to them was right. But perhaps if you analyze it very carefully, the limits of what need to be spoken about, the limits of what would make sense to the rest of the community, the limits of what would probably bring about greater comfort, greater solace, greater peace in community. So if you don't understand that what I am uttering today is not going to bring about peace, but more conflict, then why should I say that? Therefore, one of the important dimensions of ahimsa is, I think, what Gandhiji was talking about is, you don't not even talk which will hurt somebody, but even in your mind you will not have a thought which will hurt somebody. Therefore, the practice of restraint and what is good to be spoken and why when we need to avoid things which need not be spoken will apply to every aspect of human life, whether it is the freedom of expression or practice of religion or dealing with caste, race, or even a particular model of economy. So therefore, these are important lessons you have to learn. We are actually passing through a very, let me tell you one small anecdote from my own life. So I studied in one of the most premier graduate institutions, a college in Madras called Loyola College. So that was, of course, a Christian-funded institution, a very ancient college of great repute. And I must tell you, I learned much of my understanding of life in Loyola College while I was a student of physics. And some of our students who were studying in different colleges in Madras set up a small organization called Indian Youth Association. I'm talking about 1970s. And what we thought, the motto of the association was, youth alone can save India. I still remember the motto. So youth alone can save India means every generation, if you go back to 200 years, whether it is Bankim Chandra Rai or Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, or any one of those social reformers, they were all looking at the youth. Why? Because when you are young, before you have closed your minds to openness, before you become too rigid in your understanding, before you become little tired of doing anything in life, then if you are fresh in your mind, right, that's how you will build peace and goodwill in community. So universities, educational institutions, if insofar as they are closed institutions, by propagating only, they say, one set of ideology or understanding, insofar as they are that, then of course there is a problem. Of course, several of our higher education institutions have been probably hijacked in that way. And that's another story. So let's be very clear about all this. Next question.
So there has been a long debate going on between liberty and equality. And when we see in the context of countries like India, there is a conflict between religious liberty and religious equality proposed under the doctrine of constitutional morality. Even the Supreme Court in the Sabrimala case imposed equality over liberty. So, how can we strike a balance between these two ideologies in our democracy?
When you begin to pick up wrong sticks to start a play, then you are in trouble. How do judges reason? How do anybody reason? when a problem is presented to you, your mind is already full of ideas about that problem. You already have certain notions, you already have certain perceptions about that problem. None of us are clean, unwritten slates. Our mind is full of perceptions, ideas, so on and so forth. The judge's mind is also like that. Howsoever a judge endeavors to be free and objective, it is difficult for a judge's mind to be really free and objective, because nothing called neutrality and objectivity. You can be objective, but you need not be necessarily neutral. So when a judge reasons that equality is important, the judge may think that the opposite of equality means 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the judge's reasoning, these opposites of equality, namely 1, 2, 3, 4, does not seem to be parts of a civilized world order. So these 1, 2, 3, 4 dimensions, according to the judge's mind, may be colonial, may be anarchical, may be conservative, may be orthodox. So you already have a way of looking at certain things. Therefore, then I pick up this 1, 2, 3, 4 and say, sorry, they don't count as good candidates for being part of equality, because equality is more important. Now, once I reach that conclusion, then I say the right of a religion will become subordinate. And to add strength to my propositions, what will I do? I look into the Constitution and I will say, Constitution says all religions are equal. But within one religion, some people are not equal. Therefore, the moral principle that all religions are equal is a morality of the Constitution. So equality is the morality of the Constitution. I stop here for a minute. I'm not even entering into analysis of whether there is something called constitutional morality at all. Why should the court probably invent a concept or an idea as a supporting or a foundation for demonstrating that equality is better or higher than a right to religion? Why did the court need that idea at all? No, if you look at some of the important constitutional cases in our country, particularly in relation to land reforms or in relation to, let's say, labor legislations, the court would have often said constitutional values. And what did they mean by that constitutional values? They meant by principles stated in the Constitution, namely it could be directive principles in the Constitution or certain principles stated in the preamble to the Constitution. So they are all stated as values. What do you mean by a value? A value is a certain standard of conduct in private or public life which aids and enhances the quality of life. Suppose I think prayer is an important value because it adds to the quality of my mind. I say good neighborliness is a good value because it adds to peace in the neighborhood. So I like to paint and I want to use my time in writing poetry. And I think therefore creativity is a value. What do they do? A value is an aid or a tool or a process by which people generate and get happiness, fulfillment, solace, joy, or whatever one may call. Therefore, we say the directive to the state policy which says equality and men and women. If you talk about men and women being paid equal wages, so it's a constitutional value. You need not call it constitutional morality. It's a value in the Constitution. Value because it adds to a particular quality of life. It adds to the enhancement of a certain people's standards of life. These are values. So when you come to Sabarimala case and the right to liberty and the constitutional morality, I think the judges were trying very hard to bring in a certain principle to support what they were trying to do about equality. And the judgment could have been even equally valid without the talking about constitutional morality at all. In my understanding, this concept does not add anything conceptually to the Constitution. Unless we say Constitution is important, rule of law is important. The constitutional provisions, among constitutional provisions, there is no hierarchy. One can understand that. But even in order to debate that, you need not bring in the idea of morality into the Constitution. The idea of morality is a larger subject. And I think as human beings, we always tend to look at what is right and what is wrong. We look at what is right and what is wrong, not only from what we have learned from our parents, not only from what we have learned from our tradition, but we also try to understand if today what appears to be is wrong, there is something, which tells the human mind that something is wrong and not acceptable at all. Something very basic, something fundamental. That is a moral sense. So child labor, we say, could be morally obnoxious. Or let's say, called engaging in sex trade and exploitation of women, you say morally obnoxious. So therefore we look at these things as morally obnoxious. But we need not therefore bring that concept of a morality into constitution and say, oh, something is constitutionally obnoxious and therefore it is opposed to constitutional morality. That is how the judges have done that. Therefore, what is constitutionally obnoxious can be straightaway stated as, because there is a freedom of speech and expression that's being taken away, it is constitutionally offensive, constitutionally wrong, so on and so forth. But ultimately, the right to freedom of religion within certain boundaries cannot be encroached on the ground of equality. Because the practice of religion, if it aids fulfillment to a certain section of the people, and as long as that does not deny the same set of fulfillment to a certain section of the people, then where is the equality? So we have built a sense of theory of equality on the footing that if women are not allowed to go and say offer worship only in one particular temple, look at what's happened. Ayyappa temples are all over the country. Women and men go all the time to this Ayyappa temple. The Sabarimala temple there is a tradition that after following, let's say, 41 days of penance, intense penance for male, that's male species, where your mind is sought to be taken away, completely taken away from all material, physical, sensual engagements. The mind is sought to be taken away from that. Suppose I want to practice that. And can you say because that is not given to us, your practice is against equality? It's a moot point. Therefore, it all depends on the values of the particular religious dimension or religious practice. How important for it, and how this kind of a practice, in fact, cements, mines the other dimensions of religion. So you must pay attention to that also. So the essential religious practices, the domain of right to religion, etc., will have to be deeply explored to say that if an essential religious practice or a way of looking at religion adds to the quality of that religion, enhances and strengthens that religion, as against is being exposed to vulnerabilities from other challenges. What are those challenges? The challenge can be from other religions. Therefore, the court has traveled a little perilous way. I hope there will be more, enlightened ways of doing it, thinking at it.
Thank you, sir. This is the last question of the session. Sir, the case of detention of the Uyghur Muslims in China didn't make the headlines anywhere. Is there any way an international intervention can take place in a timely manner to ensure detentions won't go unnoticed?
See, China is part of the Security Council of the United Nations. Now, is there any process or an international law process by which any third country can tell China, what you're doing to Uyghurs is unacceptable? China will say, that's none of your business. What I do within my community, within my country is what I can do. So unless there are the internationally available methods of challenging what a country like China can do. And you look at what is happening in India, you will find that the US Congress very often receives reports by congressmen who engages study groups and research groups to find out what is happening in the rest of the world about human rights violations. As if the US Congress and some other congressmen are human rights pundits who can probably write dissertations on human rights violation in other parts of the world. But then we don't say anything about it. Because as long as it doesn't interfere with the Indian state's competence to do what it wants to do within its own country, and I don't think we need to bother about it, except at a high diplomatic level, at a high international level, we say, look here, this is how international practice of expression shall take place. Now, I cannot answer your question about China except to say that probably at some point of time, when internally, the Chinese people's genius of challenging the Chinese Communist Party's hegemony over all affairs of life of all people in China. When some challenge comes, I think that's the way it's out. So what happened in Hong Kong, so Taiwan, small stories, I don't know. I have not studied that very deeply.
Thank you so much, sir.
Are we through?
Yes, sir. So I would just like to extend my thanks to you, sir, for taking out your time to share your insights and enlightening thoughts. It was a pleasure to have you, sir.
It's my privilege, sir. I hope we'll be able to meet beyond the virtual world very soon.
Yes, sir. Let's hope that.
All right. Good day to all of you.
Yes, sir. I would also like to thank Think India and Human Rights Defense International for providing us with this incredible opportunity to learn. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants for their patience and wholehearted participation in this intellectual venture.
Now, participants are requested to leave the meeting. Thank you, Venkat Ramani sir, again. Thank you for your time, sir.
All right. Thank you.
And one more thing to the participants, we would be scheduling 2 more sessions tomorrow and day after. So the timings of the sessions and the details would be mailed to you.
Okay. Aniket, please end the meeting. Venkat Ramani sir can leave now.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Venkat Ramani sir, again.
Thank you.
All right.